First story, The Midnight Visitor. I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or urban legends. I'm a realist, and I pride myself on that. So, when I moved to Greendale, a small, quiet town in upstate New York, just a week before Halloween, I wasn't too concerned about the spooky decorations or eerie tales that my new neighbors seemed so fond of sharing. The town itself felt stuck in time, a postcard-perfect place where everyone knew each other's business and Halloween was celebrated with more tradition than I was used to. But it was charming in its own way. Lanterns carved with crooked grins lit up every porch, and children ran around with bags of candy, their laughter echoing down the sleepy streets. My house, a modest two-story fixer-upper on Elm Street, sat a little further away from the main part of town. It was quieter here, more secluded. The isolation was one of the things that drew me to it. After years of living in noisy apartments, I craved the peace and quiet that Greendale promised. It was my first Halloween night in the new house, and the evening had been uneventful. A few knocks at the door, kids shouting trick or treat, followed by handing out candy. By 9 p.m., things had quieted down. I turned off the porch light, signaling that I was done for the night, and settled on the couch with a book, the soft hum of the wind outside lulling me into comfort. That's when I heard the knock. First, I ignored it. Maybe it was just the wind, or some stray kids who hadn't noticed the lights were off. But the knock came again, 3 slow, deliberate thuds, the kind that reverberate in your chest, making it hard to breathe for a moment. I sighed, put my book down, and got up to check the door. There, standing on my porch, illuminated by the dim orange glow of the jack-o'-lanterns, was a man. He wore a black suit, and his face was hidden beneath a plain white mask, featureless except for 2 eye holes. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there staring. "Hey, sorry, no more candy," I called through the door, keeping it shut. "I'm done for the night." He didn't respond, just stood there, waiting. Maybe it was some kind of prank. Teenagers, I thought, shaking my head. I turned away, heading back to the living room. But something about the man unsettled me. I tried to brush it off as leftover nerves from all the ghost stories I'd been hearing, but I found myself glancing back toward the front door more than once. By midnight, I was getting ready for bed when the knocking started again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I crept to the front window, peeking through the curtain. The man was back. Same mask, same stillness. His presence sent a chill crawling up my spine. I locked the door this time, securing the deadbolt and flipping the chain across. "Not tonight, buddy," I muttered under my breath, trying to sound braver than I felt. I wasn't about to open the door for some weirdo in the middle of the night. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding now, ears straining to hear if he'd leave. But then, nothing, just silence. I don't know why, but something told me to check the back door. As I walked through the hallway toward the kitchen, a growing sense of dread knotted in my stomach. When I reached the door, my breath caught in my throat. It was unlocked. I could have sworn I'd locked it earlier. A loud creak from upstairs made me freeze. I wasn't alone. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but I stood rooted to the spot, my mind racing. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911, but before I could hit call, I heard it. A slow, deliberate footstep from the second floor, directly above me. Someone was in my house. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen knife, and backed into the living room, my eyes flicking between the staircase and the front door. I was too afraid to breathe, listening for any movement, any sound that could tell me where he was. But then the house fell silent again. I don't remember how long I stood there, knife clutched in my hand, every muscle in my body tensed. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to check the house. I moved quietly, creeping up the stairs, terrified of what I might find. But when I opened the bedroom door, there was nothing. No sign of anyone, just emptiness. I checked every room, every closet, locked every door, every window. Whoever or whatever had been inside was gone. For the next few days, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just jumpy from the move. Maybe it was a prank, and the guy had left when he saw I wasn't opening the door. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. And then, a week later, I got the first photograph. It was delivered in a plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single picture, me, sitting at my kitchen table, completely alone. Except, I wasn't. In the corner of the photo, barely visible in the shadows, was the man in the mask. Watching me, I tore through the house that day, searching for cameras, for anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. No sign of forced entry, no hidden cameras, nothing out of place. The photos kept coming, always the same, me alone going about my day. But in every picture, the masked man was there. Sometimes just a shadow in the background, sometimes closer. Always watching, always silent. It's been a month now. I don't sleep much anymore. Every creak, every shift of the house makes my heart race. I've changed the locks, installed cameras, even thought about moving. But something tells me that it won't matter. He's still watching. He's always watching. Second story, the invitation. I'd never been one for big Halloween parties. But something about the invitation intrigued me. It showed up in my mailbox, no return address, no name. Just a simple, black envelope with my name written in a delicate, flowing script, and a note inside that read, "You are cordially invited to a Halloween masquerade at the Holloway Mansion. 8 p.m. sharp. Costumes required." I had never heard of the Holloway Mansion, but a quick Google search told me it was an old, abandoned estate on the outskirts of town. The place had been empty for decades, left to decay after the original owners disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I figured the invite had to be from one of my friends, someone pulling a Halloween prank, or maybe planning a surprise. After all, it's not every day you get invited to a masquerade at a place like that. Curiosity got the better of me. I found a simple costume at a thrift shop, black dress, lacy gloves, and a vintage mask with feathers, and decided to go. What's the worst that could happen, right? I'd show up, have a few laughs, and head home. When I pulled up to the mansion that night, my heart skipped a beat. The house was massive, looming against the night sky like a forgotten relic. Shadows danced across the ivy-covered walls as the wind howled through the trees. The air was colder than usual for October, and the distant sound of music echoed from within, though it was faint and unsettling, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside. I stepped out of the car and made my way up the long, winding path to the front door. 2 lanterns flickered on either side of the entrance, casting an eerie glow. As I approached, the heavy wooden doors creaked open on their own, as if expecting me. Inside, the mansion was grand, but in a way that felt wrong. It smelled of dust and age, and the dim lighting cast strange shadows across the ornate furniture. The music, soft and haunting, played from somewhere unseen. But what struck me most were the people. The guests, dozens of them, were all dressed in elaborate costumes, their faces obscured by intricate masks. They moved slowly, methodically, as if they were caught in a trance. No one spoke. They danced in complete silence, their feet gliding across the floor in a rhythm that didn't match the faint music. It was like watching a scene from another time. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I shook it off. It's just a Halloween party, I told myself. Everyone's just getting into character. I slipped through the crowd, glancing around for someone I recognized, expecting one of my friends to jump out and reveal that this was all some elaborate joke. But no one did. Instead, as I moved deeper into the ballroom, I felt eyes on me. Every masked face seemed to turn my way, their gazes tracking my movements. It wasn't subtle. They were all staring, their heads turning ever so slightly as I passed, like I was the only one in the room that didn't belong. I tried to brush it off, but the atmosphere felt wrong. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the music seemed to slow, the notes stretching unnaturally long. My heart began to race. This wasn't right. Something was off. I decided I'd had enough. I needed to leave. I turned back toward the entrance, weaving through the silent crowd. The stairs followed me, burning into my back. I could feel them closing in, though no one moved. No one said a word. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in shallow gasps, the chill of the mansion settling into my bones. When I reached the door, I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. I pulled harder, but it was like the door had been sealed shut. I pounded on it, calling out, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the silence of the mansion. I spun around, searching for another exit, but the guests had stopped dancing. They stood motionless, all of them now facing me, their masks tilted ever so slightly, as if amused by my desperation. That's when the chanting started. Low at first, barely a whisper. The words were strange, foreign, but they filled the air, growing louder, echoing off the walls. I backed away from the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. The crowd parted, revealing a figure standing at the center of the room. A man, tall, gaunt, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, stepped forward. His mask was unlike the others, a grotesque, twisted thing with horns curling from the sides, and his eyes were glowing, like embers in a dying fire. "You came," he said, his voice raspy, ancient. The final guest. The room was spinning now. The chanting grew louder, the words wrapping around me like vines, tightening, suffocating. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of what was happening, but my vision blurred. The masks, they were falling away one by one, revealing the faces beneath. I wish I could say they were human. The guests, no, the things were decaying, their flesh hanging from their bones, eyes sunken into hollow sockets. Their skin was gray and cracked, like they had been pulled from the grave. Some were missing chunks of flesh. Others had faces twisted in eternal agony. But they all stared at me, lifeless, yet somehow alive. I screamed, but no sound came out. The man with the horned mask stepped closer, his grin widening, revealing rows of sharp, rotting teeth. "You were invited," he said, his voice booming now, reverberating in my skull. The last soul needed to complete the ritual. I turned, desperate to escape, but the room seemed to close in around me. There was no way out. The walls, the windows, even the doors. It was as if the mansion itself had trapped me. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet, like the ground was swallowing me whole. The last thing I remember was the laughter. Not the joyous kind, but a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the hall as the masked figures surrounded me. Their hands reached out, cold and clammy, pulling me down into darkness. And then nothing. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. Days? Weeks? Maybe longer. But I can tell you this. I'm still here, inside the mansion, trapped. The guests, they don't leave. Neither do I. The masquerade never ends. And now I wait, watching, as the next invitation is sent out. Third story, The Children in the Fog. Halloween night had always felt like just another day to me. No big deal. Even as a kid, I never cared much for the costumes or the candy. So when I got stuck working a late shift this year, I didn't think twice about it. I was tired, ready to crash, and I just wanted to get home. It was close to midnight by the time I left work. The streets were eerily quiet, even for a Halloween night. I figured most of the trick-or-treaters had already gone home, their pillowcases stuffed with candy, and the bars were closing up. The air was damp, and a thick fog had rolled in, the kind that clings to the ground and swallows the streetlights, turning everything into hazy blobs of yellow. I took my usual route home, through a quiet, almost forgotten part of town. The houses here were old, their paint peeling, windows dark. No decorations, no kids running around. Just silence and fog. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. That's when I saw them. 3 children standing perfectly still in the middle of the street. They were facing me, but they weren't moving. At first, I thought they were some late-night trick-or-treaters, lost on their way home. They were wearing old-fashioned costumes, one dressed as a clown, another as a princess, and the third, well, I couldn't quite tell what the third was. Some kind of mask that covered their whole head, making it impossible to see their face. They just stood there, the fog curling around their legs, making them look like they were floating. "Hey, you guys okay?" I called out, my voice breaking the heavy silence. No answer. I took a few steps closer, trying to get a better look at them. They were small, probably no older than 8 or 9, and they each held a crumpled, faded pillowcase in one hand. But they didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared at me. The air felt colder suddenly, like the temperature had dropped 5 degrees in a second. I shivered and rubbed the back of my neck, my skin prickling. Something about them felt wrong. "Are you lost?" I asked again, forcing a smile, though my heart had started to beat faster. "Where are your parents?" Still nothing, just silence. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping itself around us, muting the sounds of the world. The distant hum of cars, the faint rustle of wind through the trees. It was all gone. Even my footsteps sounded muffled, like I was walking on carpet instead of pavement. I decided to keep moving. Something about those kids made my stomach twist. They hadn't said a word, hadn't blinked. I figured it was probably just some weird Halloween prank. But I didn't care. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I walked past them, quickening my pace. But as I glanced back over my shoulder, my heart nearly stopped. They were following me, not running, not walking fast, just silently gliding through the fog, their small shapes barely visible in the haze, but close enough that I could feel their presence. My breath hitched, and I forced myself to keep moving, my eyes locked straight ahead. The street felt longer than usual, like no matter how far I walked, my house wasn't getting any closer. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the fog was playing tricks on me. But then I heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, just a few feet behind me. I turned again, my heart in my throat. The children were still there, still silent, still staring. But now, they were closer, their faces half hidden by the fog. I broke into a jog, my skin crawling. I wasn't far from home, maybe a block or two, but the fog was so thick, I couldn't see my house. All I could see were those kids, trailing after me like shadows. When I finally reached my street, my front porch light flickered into view, a weak yellow glow cutting through the mist. I sprinted up the steps, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. I glanced back one last time, expecting to see them at the foot of my driveway, but they were gone. I let out a shaky breath, laughing at myself. Maybe it was just some kids pulling a prank after all. I was overreacting. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, slamming it behind me. But something wasn't right. The house felt wrong. The air was colder than it should have been. And the silence, the same suffocating silence from the street, it followed me inside. Then I noticed it. My front door. It had been unlocked. My stomach flipped. I was sure I had locked it before I left for work. I always did. But tonight, it had been slightly ajar, like someone had already been inside. I moved through the house cautiously, flipping on lights as I went. Everything seemed in place. Nothing was missing, nothing disturbed. But the feeling of being watched clung to me like a second skin. I made my way to the living room, trying to shake the creeping unease, when I heard it. A giggle, high-pitched, childlike, coming from somewhere inside the house. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in place, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. Another giggle, this time from the hallway. Then a whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were here. I turned slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and empty, but I could feel them. Those children. They had gotten inside somehow. They had been here waiting. I moved toward the hallway, toward the attic door at the end, drawn by the whispers. They were faint, but I could hear them now. Childish voices, overlapping and echoing in the dark. My hand shook as I reached for the attic door, my breath shallow. The door creaked open, and then I saw it. The attic was empty except for the phone. My landline, which I never used, sitting on the floor off the hook, and next to it 3 small, crumpled pillowcases, just like the ones the children had been holding. Before I could react, I felt it, a breath, warm and steady right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness, thick and oppressive. But I knew they were there, watching, waiting. I ran, slamming the door behind me and locking it, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The house was theirs now, and every night since I hear them. The giggles, the whispers, the soft patter of footsteps in the dark. They never show themselves, but I know they're there, hiding in the corners, watching me, waiting for the right moment. 4th story, the House of Mirrors. Halloween was always our night. Every year, Jake, Ryan, Sarah, and I would hit the town, looking for the next big scare. We were all a bit too old for trick-or-treating, but too young to let Halloween slip by without doing something wild. This year, we decided to try something different. The House of Mirrors. It was legendary in our small town. A creepy old mansion that only opened its doors on Halloween night. They called it a haunted house attraction, but everyone knew the stories. The kind that make you laugh nervously at first, but stick with you long after you hear them. The tale goes that the house was once owned by a man who became obsessed with mirrors, convinced they could capture more than just reflections. People said that once inside, you could lose yourself, and sometimes people never came out at all. Of course, we thought it was all just part of the gimmick. A tourist trap meant to scare gullible teens. So naturally, we couldn't resist. It was around 10 p.m. when we arrived. The mansion loomed ahead, bathed in a sickly, yellow light. Fog curled around the ground, and the wind rustled the dead leaves at our feet. The place looked like something out of a horror movie. A gothic monstrosity, its windows cracked and its roof sagging. Spooky enough for you guys? I joked, trying to shake the growing unease in my gut. Ryan grinned. If we get lost in there, we'll just blame it on you. Sarah nudged him. Don't be a baby. It's just mirrors and jump scares. We'll be out in no time. Jake didn't say anything. He just stared at the house, his face unusually serious. We bought our tickets from an old man at the gate who didn't bother to smile. He barely even looked at us, just muttering, "Enjoy the show," as we walked in. The entrance was normal enough, dim lighting and fake cobwebs hanging from the corners. But the moment we stepped into the hallway, I realized something was off. Every inch of the walls was covered in mirrors, distorted, cracked, warped. They bent and twisted our reflections in ways that didn't make sense. Some mirrors stretched us out tall and thin, while others made us squat and wide. First, it was funny. We laughed as we moved through the halls, pointing out our warped reflections. But as we went deeper, the laughter died down. It was the mirrors. Something about them didn't feel right. I started to notice that my reflection wasn't quite following me. I take a step forward, and for a second, my reflection would hesitate, like it was lagging behind. Just a fraction of a second. But it was enough to make my stomach twist. I glanced over at Jake. His eyes were glued to his own reflection, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "You okay, man?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Do you feel like they're watching us?" I laughed nervously. That's the point, right? It's supposed to feel creepy. Jake shook his head, his eyes narrowing at his reflection. "No, look at them." I followed his gaze. The mirrors in front of us showed our reflections perfectly, but something was off. The reflections didn't just show our distorted bodies. They were staring back at us, really staring. Their eyes felt too focused, too alive. And then it happened. Jake's reflection smiled. Not a normal smile. It was wide, too wide, and filled with something that made my skin crawl. Jake wasn't smiling. He was standing completely still. But his reflection, it lifted a hand and waved at him. "Holy shit," Ryan whispered from behind me. "Did you guys see that?" We all froze, staring at the mirror. Jake's reflection lowered its hand, its smile fading into something cold and menacing. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice tight. "This isn't funny anymore." We tried to retrace our steps, but the mirrors, they were everywhere. The halls twisted and turned, reflecting and refracting off each other until it became impossible to tell where we had come from. Every path we took led to more mirrors, more warped versions of ourselves staring back. Then, without warning, Ryan disappeared. 1 second he was behind me, and the next, he was gone. We heard a muffled scream, but when we turned, all we saw was his reflection in one of the mirrors, his face pressed against the glass, like he was trying to break through. "Ryan!" Jake yelled, pounding on the mirror. Ryan's reflection was there, but he wasn't. And then, his reflection grinned, a twisted, sinister version of his real smile, and vanished into the mirror, leaving nothing but empty glass behind. Panic set in. We ran, the three of us sprinting through the endless maze of mirrors. But it was useless. Every corner led to more reflections, more warped faces staring back at us. And then Sarah was gone, pulled into a mirror with a terrified shriek. I turned just in time to see her reflection waving, her face twisted into something monstrous. It was just Jake and me now. He was breathing hard, panic in his eyes. "We have to find the exit," he muttered, his voice shaking. "We have to." He didn't finish. The mirrors around us flickered, and suddenly, Jake's reflection stepped out of the glass. It wasn't him. Not really. But it looked like him, only more wrong. Its smile was all teeth, its eyes gleaming with something dark. It grabbed Jake by the arm and yanked him toward the mirror. I tried to help, but it was too late. Jake disappeared into the glass, and his reflection took his place. The thing that looked like Jake turned to me, its grin spreading wider. "It's your turn now," it whispered. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but I kept moving, the reflections around me laughing, mocking my fear. Every mirror showed me something different. My face, twisted and grinning. My friends, trapped behind the glass, their eyes pleading for help. Finally, I found the exit. The door loomed ahead, bathed in a dim light. I didn't think. I just sprinted for it, bursting through into the cool night air. I stumbled out onto the street, gasping for breath. I had made it. I was free, but something felt wrong. The street was empty, eerily quiet. And then I saw it, my reflection, still visible in the glass of the front door. It wasn't me. The thing inside the mirror stared back at me, its smile wide, its eyes dark. And I realized, with a sinking horror, that I hadn't escaped at all. The Jake who left that house wasn't the real Jake. The real me was still inside, trapped in the mirrors, watching as my reflection walked away. And every night since, I can hear the faint sound of laughter echoing from the glass as the mirror Jake lives my life, while I remain here, forever part of the House of Mirrors.